Read this parable from Jesus, and I heard the last sentence as, just so, the last will be first, and the first will be last. My favorite biblical commentary notes about the landowner in this passage, who represents God. I think we can safely say that this landowner represents about God the combo of justice and mercy. Justice in that the first to work do receive a full wage for their work, and mercy in that everyone who works at all receives the same full wage. Just so, like this, the last will be first, and the first will be last. Just so, when it comes to judgment and to getting what we deserve, God is not going to be surprised at all, but humans are going to be very surprised. The kingdom of heaven is not like a usual day at work or a usual day at life. So I wondered to myself this is a great chance to unmute yourself. I wondered what you would call this parable, right? Some of the famous parables get names: the parable of the Good Samaritan, the parable of the prodigal son. What would you call today's parable?
The big surprise.
The big surprise.
First response was, what's just about working hard all day and not getting your pay?
The parable of what's just about working all day and not getting your pay, you said.
Well, if the one that's going to work an hour is going to get all of my day, it kind of puts a little iffy in there on whether or not I want to work that hard the next day.
The parable of iffiness on whether I want to work that hard.
Equality.
What was that, Jerry?
Equality.
Parable of equality.
That we're all equal.
The parable of what about me?
The parable of what about me?
What about the parable of capitalism and socialism? Deal with that one.
Yeah, it's good, John. Stirring the pot. I like it. The parable of capitalism and socialism.
So how about the parable of why bother to follow the rules? Because nothing matters.
Yeah.
Parable of why bother to follow the rules? Because nothing matters.
I think it's the parable of it's not too late to be saved.
The parable of it's not too late to be saved.
You make that do something.
No, it's
So sometimes people ask me, do you believe such and such? Do you believe the virgin birth? Do you believe the resurrection? Do you believe the great flood? Or I've heard it, or sometimes it's asked as a sort of combo question and statement. So you believe in God? And I think of myself also as someone who believes. And this week I heard the parable in light of this question of belief. So after reading the parable of the big surprise, the parable of why go to work, nothing matters, the parable of capitalism and socialism. I'm not going to remember every single name. They're so wonderful. After I read this parable, I found myself wondering, how would I live differently if I believed in my heart, if I believed this parable? How would I live differently if I believed that I was going to get a full wage? How would I live differently if I believed that everyone was going to get a full wage? And I did think, I wouldn't try so hard. No, I wasn't exactly that for me. For me, it was if God is planning already to give me the fullness of belovedness, then I wouldn't worry so hard about my work. If God is going to be merciful, maybe I could just take a breath and say thank you. And maybe I could more deeply enjoy the work of having life with God, even while I'm stumbling through it. Even when it's obvious to me that I'm only showing up at 9 a.m. or at noon or at 3 p.m. or at 5 p.m. If I believe this parable in my heart, I thought I would have more fun sharing my faith with other people, actually. I know a lot of folks have been hurt by Christianity or by Christians, and I have a fear of coming across hurtfully or judgmentally. But if sharing about my beliefs means telling folks, hey, everybody who wants in on this is getting a fully loaded plate of blessing, of wages from God, that just sounds fun to share. And I thought, if I believe this parable in my heart, I could also be more outspoken about justice. So the parable of equality, one of you called it. If justice is hard for me to proclaim if I'm thinking of it as punitive. God's justice is punitive. But in this parable, God's justice does not reorder the world through punishment. God reorders the world by the justice of same-lovedness. And that does flip all of us upside down, but only because we were expecting different lovedness. God is saying same-lovedness. It just feels different to us because we've been off kilter. Well, I could be outspoken about the justice of same-lovedness, even if the last to firstness of that makes us uncomfortable, makes me uncomfortable. And also, when I share about justice, sometimes I can feel like a hypocrite because I know that I am still perpetrating injustices in my own life. So this parable is really good news for me and for anyone else who's been out doing our own thing and committing injustices, because if I can at least get my lazy butt to the marketplace by 5 p.m., then I could participate. I could be part of the justice part. I could work on God's dream just as much as anyone else. So the justice of same-lovedness makes it easy for me to join and to call others to join. What about you? If you said, when you said I believe, if you were saying I believe this parable, I believe the parable of I'm a little iffy about getting up for work if this is work. If you said I believe the parable of equality, I give this parable a name for yourself. If you were to say what I believe, like we're going to say the creed in a few minutes. When you say I believe, if what you're saying is I believe this parable, how would you live differently?
Is the parallel read like the prodigal son? The good son complains bitterly that his wayward brother gets all the goodies from his father, and yet he's lived a terrible life. The good son says, what's going on here? Is that not the same?
Yeah. Well said, Bob.
If it's about love, I do believe that as the third child in my family, my parents loved me as much as my older siblings. It didn't diminish with each child. And this is when I think of it in those terms, the love of connectedness is equal no matter when you come along.
Mhm. Well said.
Yes, very well said.
Yeah. Thank you, Patricia.
And I think that points up the fact when we were talking about wages, it made it very, I don't know, almost political, versus the love, which Patricia said beautifully. You know, there's love for all, and we are loved. And I think that kind of, like you said, frees us up. We're not quite so afraid to speak out and say, you know, we're having a spiritual growth part, or what do you think about this? Because we're still loved, no matter what the response is. Gives
Thank
you
you, Pam.
kind of some, I don't know, courage.
That's a work atmosphere in which you can try working.
Yeah, and I could, because it would be a different relationship, not me and money, or me and food or something else. That's a love to my God and given back to me with all the strength and power that it can, that I can envelop, you know, pull around myself. So.
Thank you, Pam.
No, I look at this as if we change this to a store or a warehouse where we get up in the morning and we go shopping and we come home, and then I get there at 5 o'clock just before it closes and I can buy the same things, go shopping and go home. It kind of puts a different twist on it because the goodies are there for me anytime I choose to accept them, whether it's 8 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock at night. I'm not going because I'm going to get something like a wage. That puts a different twist on it.
Almost the parable of the non-anxious worker.
Clark, you're not going to get any toilet paper if you show up at 5.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to buy out the stock if I go at 8. There's no equality there.
Thank you, friends. The next time someone asks me about my faith, I've decided that when they ask me whether I'm a Christian or not, or whether I believe, I decided my response is not going to be something like a yes or a no that folks expect as the usual daily experience of work or life. Instead, I'm going to try and plan for something that's more like this parable, or more like Jesus's surprise, the parable of the big surprise. So someone's going to get this out of me. I'm going to try on, I believe we will all receive both justice and mercy. Or I believe anyone can accept and receive full love from God at any time. Or I believe that the last will be first and the first will be last.
I believe we don't have to be so anxious.
Amen, amen.